Hello and welcome to this panel. I'm David Tunick, president of the IFPDA, and you are at a conversation with current and former members of Black Women of Print. Everybody in the right place? Good. I'm only here to introduce Jennifer Farrell, from whom you will hear shortly. She is the distinguished curator of modern and contemporary prints and illustrated books at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We admired Jennifer with greatest enthusiasm. Your most recent exhibition at the Met, I believe your most recent, Modern Times, British Prints 1913-1939, accompanied by your 200-page book. The exhibition and the book were groundbreaking and dazzling, as we've come to expect from Jennifer Farrell. I will not provide you with what is a long list of her achievements, degrees, many exhibitions that Jennifer has to her credit, and only mention that she has worked and lectured at a remarkable number of institutions in her career, including Smith, Yale, University of Virginia, the Whitney, the Morgan, and the Museum of Modern Art, all in addition to the Met. She's deeply committed to the Black Women of Print, which was founded in 2018, the subject of our next panel. I shall step aside and let her enlighten you further as our expert and articulate moderator. So Jennifer, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, David. And thank you, Jenny, for organizing this wonderful panel. So as David mentioned, the Black Women of Print was founded by Tanikia Ward in 2018 in order to promote the visibility of Black women printmakers and create an equitable future within the discipline of printmaking. In addition to providing support and advancing work by Black women printmakers, the collective promotes the history and work of Black women artists from earlier generations. The portfolio Continuum, curated by Ward, was produced to mark the one-year anniversary of the collective. In their prints, 7 members and former members of Black Women of Print, Leslie Duguid, LaToya Hobbs, Jennifer Mack Watkins, Delita Martin, Angela Pilgrim, Stephanie Santana, and Tanikia Ward, pay homage to or reimagine the legacy of Emma Amos, Belkis Sayon, Margaret Burroughs, Elizabeth Catlett, Wanda Ewing, Allison Starr, and Betty Starr through visual elements, subjects, and techniques. Several of the artists also make reference to relatives and children in their prints, emphasizing connections between generations. Continuum is in the collection of the Smith College Museum of Art, the Getty Research Institute, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and the Milwaukee Art Museum, in addition to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It is currently on view at the Met through February, and we encourage you to see these stunning works in person. And I should also say, my first exposure to their portfolio was through the IFPDA Fair when we did a wonderful studio visit several years ago. And that, to me, is, I think that's on YouTube, is that correct, Jenny? So that's really something I encourage you to see. These wonderful artists talk about their work and talk about the production, and to see the prints in person. So therefore, it is my very great pleasure to introduce 4 of the founding members of the Black Women of Print, LaToya Hobbs, Delita Martin, Stephanie Santana, and Jennifer Mack Watkins, all of whom made prints for Continuum. Moderating the panel will be Dr. Kimberli Gant for what will certainly be a fascinating conversation. Now, a little bit about the artist and about Dr. Gant. Dr. Gant is a curator of modern and contemporary art at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. She was previously the McKinnon Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia. And my mom is still very upset that you left. She misses your work. And she has also worked as a Mellon Doctoral Fellow at the Newark Museum and Director of Exhibitions at the Museum of Contemporary African Diasporan Art. She has curated numerous exhibitions and gallery reinstallations, including Black Orpheus, Jacob Lawrence, and Moai Club, which is on view now at the Chrysler. Journeys Across the Border, US and Mexico, Andrew Nguyen, The Boat People, Brendan Fernandez, Bodily Forms, and John Aquafar Tropicos. Gant received her PhD in art history from the University of Texas, Austin, and holds both an MA and a BA in art history from Columbia University and Pitzer College. Gant has published scholarly work in academic books such as Anywhere But Here, Black Intellectuals in the Atlantic Ward and Beyond, art publications, too many to mention, just a huge amount, exhibition catalogs for the Newark Museum, the Contemporary Austin, the Studio Museum of Harlem, Paris Photo, and the Center for Contemporary Art, Lagos. The artists whose incredible work is on view are LaToya Hobbs. LaToya Hobbs is an artist, wife, and mother of two from Little Rock, Arkansas, who is currently living and working in Baltimore. She received her BA in painting from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and MFA in printmaking from Purdue University. Her work deals with figurative imagery that addresses the ideas of beauty, cultural identity, and womanhood as they relate to women of the African diaspora. Her exhibition record includes numerous national and international venues, and her work is housed in private and public collections, including the Harvard Art Museum, Petrucci Family Foundation Collection of African American Art, the National Gallery of Namibia, the Getty Research Institute, and the Baltimore Museum of Art. Other accomplishments include the 2020 Janet and Walter Sondheim Artscape Prize, a nomination for the 2022 Queen Sonia Print Award, and a 2022 IFPDA Artist Grants. She is also the professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art and a founding member of the Black Women of Print. Her monumental work, relief work, Jeanette's Daughters, is currently on view here at the IFPDA, as well as her portraits of the founding members of Black Women of Print. Delita Martin is an artist currently based in Huffman, Texas. She received a BFA in drawing from Texas Southern University and an MFA in printmaking from Purdue University. Formerly a member of the Fine Arts faculty at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, Martin is currently working as a full-time artist in her studio, Black Box Press. Primarily working from oral traditions along with vintage and family photographs as a source of inspiration, Martin's work explores the power of the narrative impulse. Her finished works combine collaging, drawing, painting, printmaking, and sewing techniques, placing her figures amid patterns to visually represent what it looks like when we become the spiritual other. When we pray or meditate, we enter the veilscape, end quote. Martin's layering of techniques and materials, as well as her use of pattern and color, signifies a liminal space, the space between the waking life and the spirit life. By fusing this visual language with oral storytelling in this different space, she offers other identities and narratives for women of color. Her work has been exhibited both nationally and internationally, recently shown at the 2022 Venice Biennial and the National Museum for Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. And she's also served as a 2021 keynote speaker for the Mid-American Print Council. Stephanie Santana is a textile artist and a fine art printmaker whose work explores Black interiority, identity, and the strategies of resistance across generations and geographies. Her exhibit record includes Claire Oliver Gallery, the John and Robin Horn Gallery at the Penland State School of Craft, and the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, among others. She was recently named a finalist for the Print Center's 97th Annual International Competition. And in 2023, she is scheduled to present a solo exhibition in Brooklyn and complete a summer artist residency. Jennifer Mack Watkins is a contemporary visual artist whose artistic aesthetic draws from a confluence of reference points, most of which include her Japanese mokuhanga printmaking techniques and her culturally rich Southern roots. Her work has been acquired at prominent institutions, including the Smithsonian National Museum of African American Art History and Culture, Library of Congress, the Met, the Getty Archives, And she's also been featured in publications including the New York Times, Vogue, and Essence. Jennifer holds a BA in Studio Arts from Morris Brown College, an MAT from Tufts University, and an MFA in printmaking from Pratt. And she's also on the board of trustees of the Brattleboro Museum. In 2022, she completed her first children's book illustration for Random House titled You Gotta Meet Mr. Pierce, written by Carmela Van Vliet and Chiquita Mullins. The book will be available in 2023. So please help me welcome the Black women of print and Dr. Kimberli Gant.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I sounded really important right there. Thank you, Jennifer. So excited to have you all with us, excited to be talking with this incredible panel of ladies here, of creatives, of artists. And I want to, I think, begin the discussion, and I really want this to be a conversation with us this afternoon, really beginning with the Black women of print. And Jennifer did a wonderful introduction, kind of giving us a background on, the founding and the purpose. But let's talk a little bit more about how each of you got involved. What were the conversations? What were the dialogues? You're all based in different places. This started in 2018, but, did the pandemic, how far were you when the pandemic hit, and what were the issues that happened because of that? So I'd like to give us just like the background that we can't get from a slide presentation in terms of that. So I'll just we'll be sharing some mics over here, but whoever would like to start with just giving us some of that background.
Thank you all for coming today. I actually was in contact with Tanikia Ward. She reached out to me in reference for an interview for a print magazine based in the UK, and we just became really fast friends. And she spoke with me about Black women of print, and I was really excited about, the mission behind what she wanted to do. This preservation of, what we're doing in the print world and what we're doing in our studios. And I was, of course, on board, and she asked me to come on as a founding member, and I was like, absolutely. I think this is an important organization that you're forming, and I definitely want to be a part of that.
Yeah, so my introduction to the organization is very similar. I connected with Tanikia via social media, actually. So she kind of sent me a message, say, I'm thinking about starting this organization. I would really love you to participate. Can we talk further? And it just kind of started from there. And she was like, well, do you know any other people? And I was like, yeah, Delita Martin. She's like, oh, I already know Delita. And I've talked to her. But I think some things that really stuck out about me was she kind of talked about the relationship between Elizabeth Khaled and Margaret Burroughs, how they were two Black women printmakers, but also in relationship as friends, and just talking about the importance of that bond, to have other people from similar backgrounds kind of working in a similar field that you can just have support from. And so I kind of, I'm kind of a loner in terms of but when she talked about this group, I thought it was something really important to be a part of, just because I have not really known a lot of Black women printmakers. So I was like, it's just excited to see who else was going to be a part of the collective. And so then I learned about Jennifer's work, I learned about Stephanie's work, and just all these really dynamic women that I would have probably not ever known of before, except for us coming together through this organization.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you all for coming. So I got involved in a very similar way. I've known Tanikia for over 10 years because she had hired me to do some illustration work when she was doing a print publication that she was working on. So she reached out and asked if I would like to be a part of the group because my background is a little bit different, as Jennifer Farrell mentioned. I'm a textile artist, so I was working primarily in print, like working on printing, patterns in repeat, and working as a designer as well, and a textile stylist. So I just thought it would be incredible to connect with other Black women printmakers, and just it's been an amazing journey to get to know everybody in the group. And we've done things like have residencies together. Like we went to Penland School of Craft over the summer and exchanged tips about different materials that we were using. It's like, oh, have you tried this new pen, or have you used like this certain type of film to make your positives? Like it's just so valuable to have those exchanges. So, yeah.
I think it began with like Tanika reaching out to me through email, and I was like, "What? There's other Black women who print that are locally here with me." And I was living in Hoboken at the time, New Jersey, and so I actually only knew Angela Pilgrim, who's one of the founding members, and I had gone to support her in other exhibitions, and I found out that Stephanie was here, and I found like Leslie is here, and I was like, well, I got 3 here, but everybody else was kind of like, we kind of went through Zoom talks and phone calls, we never ever met. Like I only met LaToya like last year, and I met Stephanie for the first time last year, but everything was all through like virtual spaces. So that's the beauty part of it, that we brought ourselves together by our love for printmaking, and that's why we're here. And I think it wasn't the vision of Tanika Word and her understanding how to form bonds, like different states, like Maryland, and I was in Jersey, and like it was just Brooklyn. So I think just the fact that we never met, and just the bond of our passion for printmaking really made it really a special thing.
I mean, what's wonderful to hear about that, and I know Taniki is not here, but I appreciate the fact that she had a vision. She had relationships. She was going out to find, she knew that we existed, that y'all existed. And it was a matter of, okay, how do we bring all this energy, all this creativity together in a space? And then between all of you, then coming together and, like you were saying, doing residence together, sharing information, sharing your practices, sharing tips, because again, it's about building this community. You already had kind of founded it, so now it's even just kind of growing it further. So I just think that really goes to show the real importance, all of us kind of going out there and making the importance of the relationships that we build, and how do we cultivate that and nurture and maintain that in our own careers. And I want to add the conversation a little bit as we're kind of moving through. So you can see a bit of the artist's work in the Continuum exhibition at the Met. If you haven't had a chance to go see that, definitely go. It is currently on view. But I want to now kind of move the conversation, because so the presentation, we've got everybody's images up there, so I'm going to kind of have everybody individually talk. But let's talk about each of your works. I mean, I think one thing that to me really unites the 4 of you together is, and we can get to this a little bit later, but the way in which you all represent the beauty, the power, the vulnerability of Black women, and in your own individual ways and how you do it. So I want to kind of talk about that as a content of your work, but the individual ways in which you do that. But Delita, why don't you kind of start us off and just giving us a background? And I love for the audience to really understand, you're working, in printmaking, but also you're painting on top of it, you're stitching on top of it, you're really kind of making unique works on top of editioned works. But so thinking about all that, so I will hand you both the microphone and the clicker.
Thank you. So I came to printmaking very late, actually. I have my BFA from Texas Southern University in Houston, and in drawing. And so I started off in drawing, and drawing's always been my first love. And this is, totally not true, but at some point I felt like drawing, this was pretty much as far as I could go. I had taken it as far as I could go. And so during this time of frustration, I'm in undergrad, and I at the art department picking up a drawing pad, one Saturday morning, and I hear some commotion in the printmaking room. And we didn't have a printmaking class at the time because we never had enough students for the class to actually be fulfilled. And John Biggers, who founded our art department, was reopening an edition from like the 1960s, and he was there with my professor, Harvey Johnson. Early Huttonall was photographing, and Charles Kreiner was actually helping him create the prints. And so what was amazing was I just kind of slipped in the room, and I sat down, and I saw all of these chemicals and just things that look so complicated to me sitting on the table. And I was like, what in the world is happening? Like, this is pure madness. How are you getting something so beautiful, so sensitive, and so delicate? And there's a stone, and there's acid, and there's all these things that have these warning labels on them. But yet it was just such a magical moment. So I remember just sitting in the corner thinking to myself, one day I'm going to do this. And so fast forward, graduate from Texas Southern University, and I decided I wanted to go to graduate school, but I was going to go for printmaking. Had no idea what that meant, never pulled a print in my life. I get there, and I'm that one person in class that's like this, and everybody's like, oh, God. You know, it's like, here she goes again with another question. But I sat in on undergraduate classes during the day to understand process, and I worked in the evening with my work. But I think what happened was once I graduated from graduate school, I had to make a choice in terms of who I wanted to be as an artist and how I wanted to identify myself. And so for me, it made sense for me to bring in all of my love for art and not separate. It's okay for me to identify as a printmaker, but being able to layer what I call the history of how a work is created. You know, if I can't paint it, I'll draw it. If I can't draw it, I'll print it. And if I can't print it, I'll collage it. So all of those things were wonderful. And I think that was the first time as an artist that I felt free. And so I continue to work in that way. This is one of my latest works, a couple of weeks old. And this is a lithograph and relief printing, and also, and of course, hand stitching as well. So hand stitching has always been an important part of my work. It's something that I inherited from my grandmother. The stitch that you see in my work is the only stitch I know because it's the only one she taught me. But it's very important because, you know, during those times that I spent with her, she was able to, I feel like, piece together my history, my her history for me. And because my work is so narrative, it made perfect sense for me to piece together these women's narrative in much the same way. Oh, sorry. This is me working in the studio, of course, painting after I've printed. So just a little visual there. This is actually a piece that I did of Tanikia. One of the wonderful things about working with her we did the residency at Penland, and we photographed each other to kind of include each other in our work. And this was such an incredible photograph of her that I wanted to create. This is a project that you'll see here. Actually, this is my first time working with a master printer, and I worked at High Point with Cole Rogers. It was absolutely incredible, but I spent a lot of time, I love antiquing, and so I was collecting vintage christening gowns, handmade christening gowns, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with those gowns, but I kept them over the years. And so working with High Point, it was great being able to take these in to High Point and just kind of brainstorm with other printmakers and decide, making this project Keepsakes is like talking about adultification in children. And I wanted to create works that kept little girls precious and kept them sacred. And so we created these prints. It's called Keepsakes. There's 7 individual images in the series. You can see them here at the fair. And one of the amazing things that I really want to talk about really quickly with this project was that it was important for me to hand stitch on the prints. And then I realized how many prints there were at the end. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And so I got the idea of bringing in some ladies, older ladies, around my mother, my grandmother's age, and brought them into the studio to help me stitch these prints. But what I didn't realize was that really changed the dynamic of the project itself. So it was like a quilting bee, and I learned about life. I learned about marriage. I learned about child rearing. I learned about cooking, and I would get all of this amazing, wonderful advice. And I was just like, why hadn't I thought of this sooner? But it was just incredible being with these women and just learning so much about myself, learning about them and the community that I live in. So that was the wonderful thing about this particular project. And this is the work that was that's in Continuum in the portfolio, and it was wonderful because we were talking about all of the artists that inspired us, and I was always inspired by Elizabeth Catlett. She was the first printmaker that I looked at beyond John Biggers, and definitely the first Black woman printmaker that I looked at. And I've always been inspired by her mark making and the energy of her work. And I just really have always tried to bring that into my work. And that's what I've tried to do with this piece.
Hello. Hello. I'm Jennifer Mack Watkins, and so I'm supposed to click too? Yes. Okay. This way, right? Yeah. Okay. And so I wanted to kind of begin this this conversation with the works that I was inspired by, Betty Saar. I feel like really definitely an inspiration to me as a printmaker because of her ability to be able to go from sculpture to like mixed media to print. Like her versatility of different techniques and media is just beyond exceptional. And so when we were tasked to like find an artist that we could use for inspiration, I was like, well, it has to be Betty Saar. And so like I felt like she totally got it, like understanding of how to like take stereotypes and biases and her being a mother and living through different time eras and be able to put that into her work. I think that was the reason why I chose her as inspiration. And I made my piece titled Future Undetermined. It was around the time that I was pregnant with my son. And there was a lot of unrest happening in the country, a lot of unsurety, a lot of social unrest that we're still continuing to go through today. But that was a really prime year, and it still is today. But I wanted to put babies in there because that was what was on my mind, and having a son, and how do I keep my son safe? How do I be able to like help him to navigate and help my children navigate this crazy society? And I felt like education is key. So I decided to put in some textual components of like some numbers, and like you could see some script, and you can see different types of handwriting. But I wanted to really incorporate education, and I feel like that's the key to like being able to navigate, and also being what to do with it when you get it and how you use it. I think is important. And so I did this piece. I was pregnant, and I worked with Leslie Duguid. I was like, well, how I'm gonna print? I'm gonna print this. I need to get to the print shop. I knew that Leslie had a print space, and so I drove to Brooklyn. I was like, Liz, I gotta be able to contribute to this portfolio. I need your help. And so it's just a matter of me making all the different layers in advance, emailing her the different layers, and then we came together and we knocked it out in a day. It took her all day, Luckily, it's a small edition, but I was able to do that, and she just gave me the paper. It was just something as simple as someone handing you the paper of the next one and getting into routine and getting it done. And I walked away, and it was done in a day. It took more than that to make it, but it took a day because she's just so sufficient and she's so good at what she does. And I was able to get that done. And then I also, before I even became a silkscreen, I wanted to make sure I was incorporating Japanese woodblock, mokuhanga. And so I wanted to basically make that the base of the key image. And then I was able to take that, scan my cut areas, and add that to the silkscreen. But it began with the drawing, and then it began with the woodcut. And eventually, after the edition was created, I made it into a small series of like 4 or 5 from mokuhanga, where I added like a little bit of gradient that you can see Bakashi at the top. And then I also worked on a book. And so basically the book comes out 2023, and I finished the block. I finished 14 blocks in 2 weeks at Penland. I had to do about 34 wood blocks total, but I had half done. So my goal was to finish in 2 weeks to get the other half done, because I had a deadline. And as an artist, I was like, wait, deadlines other than a show? Like every couple weeks or every couple months. It was a different way of working. I never worked like that before in my life. And it was a really great experience. And so I was able to take the woodcuts from there, and then I had to get home and had to still do work. It wasn't complete. So I got home, I was like, well, I have to complete everything else. And so then from there, I was able to, sorry, let me go back. I was able to add color and collage elements to it. And it took about 1.5 years to get that done. And I'm looking forward to it hitting the stores in January 2023. A lot of work. And then in addition to that, I have a chance to work with Andrew Mockler, master printer, Jungle Press Editions. He's here in the crowd, and we have worked together on a number of different editions. And this edition was really special because I wanted to make sure that my children continue to see themselves in the work that I create. We had did Black Boy Hope 1 and 2 for my exhibition that I had solo at the Brattleboro Museum, and I wanted to continue on with the repetition of the stars and the elements and seeing the future. So I decided to keep that as a repeating element in the 2 lithographs. And so what's interesting about Space Girl is that I prepared the drawing in advance. I said, Andrew, I'm coming up here to Harlem because I was a featured artist for the Schomburg Literary Festival. I said, I got a day. Like, I need to just knock this stone drawing and put this touche down here, put this grease pencil here. But I already had a plan. Like, I knew, like, I wanted to keep some of the same elements together, but I said, I have a day. So I think I might have sat down for like maybe, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 hours straight, and knocked out drawing the key image for the color lithograph. With Space Boy, I basically did the same thing. I think I was about to like go on this big thing. I was about to have surgery, so I was like, look, I have to get this done. I can't lift stones. I need your help. I need this done. And so I'm always used to like having drawings prepared in advance, and I can knock it out in a couple hours. And he said, well, just sit down. You know, here's your touche. He had everything laid out. All the grease pencils were sharpened and ready to go. The blades, I was like, this is perfect. So I just go in there and I just draw, knock it out. And so I pretty much finished that one as far as the key image in the day. And then he continued to add the colors. And we'd go back and forth through Zoom and emails. How's this color palette, and over the phone and Zoom. And then going into like also what I also do as well, not only just making edition works. This is You Gotta Meet Mr. Pierce, which is it's a storied life of like Elijah Pierce, who was a self-taught artist who lived in Ohio, and he was a woodcut artist, and he also did sculptures. I knew nothing about him. I had a Random House Coquila, the same people who made the book Hair Love. They came to me, they emailed me. I was like, this can't be real. I was like, this is not, because sometimes, you know, artists try to get scanned. You don't know if it's real. I was like, you looking for me? You sure? You know, and so like, I was like, okay, well, that's me. And so they said, we want you because you do woodcuts just like Elijah Pierce did. And so I was like, wow, I don't know who this person is. And so then I started to research to learn more about him, and it helped me to really make the book come together. Like, I actually got a chance to find films that were produced in the 70s before I was born, black and white, of course. With him, I wanted to understand who the character of Elijah Pierce was. How did he walk? How did he stand? What did he wear? And I got a chance to find the filmmakers, Jeffrey Wolf, and so not someone else there, but I forget. But I basically reached out to him through email, told him my project. He's like, yeah, I'll work with you. And so we had a whole Zoom conversation during COVID, and then he gave me all the archives, all the photographs that he ever had of Elijah Pierce. And then from there, I was able to take film stills and photographs and conversations, and to make the barbershop look exactly as it was when he was cutting hair. He's a barber as well. And so it was really great to be able to put this book together, 34 woodcuts, front and cover. Everything is all illustrated by me with Mako Hunga, with collage and some digital elements and fabric as well. And so looking forward to having it hit the bookstores, and I'm looking forward to having another aspect of my career, really channeling my Jacob Lawrence, you know, fine artist and illustrator, and be able to bring print to like every different community, from museums to like libraries to the smallest bookstores to like the largest areas like this is today. And so I'm really excited about that coming out in January, and that's the plans. That's what I'm working on for now. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this talk today. Yes, I'm going to show you some of my work. So my background is, I describe myself as a painter and printmaker. So I work distinctly in both of those areas, but a lot of my current work is kind of a combination of both of those two worlds together. So this first image I'm showing you is titled Stargazer, Theo. It's a portrait of my youngest son, Theo, who's in the front row of the audience today. So this is a print that I did while I was in residence at Austin Peay University earlier this year in Clarksville, Tennessee. So yeah, they brought me in as a visiting artist for maybe 3 or 4 days, carved the block there, printed the edition. So I kind of understand Jennifer with those deadlines, like you got to get it done. You just got to get it done. So this is an example of like what I would call like my traditional print work. So where I'm carving a block for the purpose of producing an edition set of works. So I do plan to continue the Stargazer series. So I did one son, so obviously I have to do my older son too, because that wouldn't be fair, but I do plan to do other portraits of like all the young boys in my family, kind of focusing on this idea of Stargazer. I'll go to the next slide, so for sake of time. So as I mentioned before, I'm really interested in combining aspects of myself as a painter and printmaker. I'm also really interested in this idea of the print matrix being the art object in and of itself. And so I kind of came to this idea in graduate school at Purdue University. Delita and I both Purdue alums. But I was looking for ways to kind of make my figurative work more contemporary. So I was working in printmaking, predominantly focused on woodcut. I also still, engage as a painter, but it was kind of a natural progression for me to find out ways to kind of bring both of those worlds together. So I was kind of questioning, like, why can't the block be the art object? So this particular work that I have on the screen is the largest work that I've done to date. It's titled Carving Out Time, and I describe it as a portrait of my day. So I don't know if you've been to the Jeanette's Daughters exhibit, the piece that I have on display now, but all of these 5 scenes are that same size. And so altogether, the work is about 60 feet long. So it's a chronicle of my day, but broken down into 5 parts. So you can kind of see at the bottom a little thumbnails of each of parts of the day. So it starts in the morning time, and then the next panel is titled Homeschool and Housework. The third image, which you can see larger, is titled Dinner Time. The next piece is bedtime for the boys. And then finally, I'm able to shift into my role as an artist. So I'm just kind of chronicling my day as a practicing artist and a mother. Something else that is significant about this series is that I really took time to honor other artists who are important to me in my practice in some way. So in each of those scenes, like the bedroom scene and all of those scenes, there's artwork on the walls. And so all of those are actual pieces by other artists who I admire. So in the bedroom scene, there's a nod to Elizabeth Catlett. In the dinner scene there's a nod to Valerie Maynard, who unfortunately passed away last month, another amazing Black woman printmaker. There's a piece by Carrie James Marshall there. And so all throughout the scenes, I'm kind of paying homage to other artists who have influenced my practice in some way. And so the scale of this piece was inspired by Carrie James Marshall's Untitled Woodcut. I don't know if you guys have been fortunate to see that, but I saw that piece for the first time in 2014 and just blew my mind. And so eventually worked up the courage through prompting of my husband to try something on that same scale. So. But if you're interested in seeing kind of like the behind the scenes of that piece, there's a video on my YouTube channel, LaToya M. Hobbs Studio, where you can kind of see me in studio working on it and like the printing process of those. So these panels were actually printed by Big Ink. And then you can kind of see me preparing for an exhibition where they debuted at the Baltimore Museum of Art earlier this year. Okay, and so here's an example of one of the prints from the series of the 5th scene, the studio. So this was at an exhibition that we had for Black Women of Print, curated by Delita and Tanikia at High Point Center for Printmaking. So yeah, that's a really great experience to have. And then I think that was the first time that I had met Tanikia in person, and Stephanie and other people like Jennifer mentioned. We had all been communicating virtually up until like literally last year. So that is the studio. And then this is my contribution to the Continuum portfolio. So as other members have mentioned, we were each tasked with each task was finding someone to use as inspiration for the piece. So my first pick was going to be Elizabeth Catlett, who is like my primary inspiration in terms of my printmaking practice and the reason why I'm a printmaker today. But unfortunately, I responded to the poll too late and Delita beat me. But I would say Margaret Burroughs, she is, I would say, the second Black female printmaker artist that I discovered. And so particularly the print mother, Africa, that was the first work that I found out about of hers. And I just fell in love with that piece, and particularly the stippling technique that she is using to create the portrait of the figure. So I wanted to kind of try that technique as well. So this is a portrait of her that I'm using. And then if you go back to this carving out timepiece in the second panel, you can kind of see it at the bottom. So I'm paying homage to her again in that larger piece as well, with kind of trying to recreate that print as well. And then the next work that I'm going to show is actually here on display. So with our organization, we've really been talking about the idea of like capturing our stories, so that, you know, we don't have the same issues going forward where us not knowing about any other Black women printmakers or not knowing that many. So since I primarily deal with portraiture as my subject matter, it was important to me to do portraits to commemorate all of the founding members of Black women of print. So here are 3 images, and I chose these images because these people are not physically here today. So that first portrait is a portrait of Tanikia Word. The second in the middle is Leslie Dogood, who runs her own press. So when Jennifer was talking about doing the screen printing, that's with Leslie in the middle, and then Angela Pilgrim. And again, those works are all on display here. And then the last print that I'll briefly mention, again, is the work that I was commissioned to do for IFPDA. This is titled Jeanette's Daughters. So I'm really thankful that Jeanette and her husband were able to be here today and one of their daughters to see the work in person. Yeah, it was a great experience. So yeah, kind of, again, playing on this idea of like the matriarch is something that I've really been thinking about in my work. And so I met Pastor Dexter Jeanette and Jeanette Howard when I was an undergrad at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. And at the time when I was attending there, all of these sisters, they were like pretty much babies or toddlers. And so earlier this year, you know, I keep up with them on social media, and Pastor Jeanette posted this image of them, and I was just like, I've got to make something about this. So not only thinking about the children, but thinking about Pastor Jeanette as a person. She was somebody that I really looked up to at the time, just because she was like just fearless spiritual leader and just so much poise and so much grace. So just kind of honoring her legacy as a woman. It was just something that I've been really thinking about in my work as well. And I think that's it.
Hello? Let me get the hang of the clicker. So again, my name is Stephanie Santana, and I work typically in textile arts. So I work with a lot of photographs from my grandfather, who was a Wendell Long. He was an educator in the Dallas area for 45 years, and he passed several years ago, but he made some amazing photographs that I see myself as sort of responding to in the tradition of Harriet Jacobs and Faith Ringgold and quilters who make pictorial or made pictorial and narrative quilts. So this first image, I'm just going to talk through a little bit about the background. So on the left panel, you'll see an image that's in the interior of the living room, where you kind of see, it's an image of my great aunt and my my aunt and my mother in the 1950s in Terrell, Texas. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see an image of them as well. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of a hard time seeing the work, but I know my own work pretty well. So, but anyway, the way that I work with these 2 photographs is essentially thinking about the interior and the exterior, and I think about dualities a lot in terms of like our interior lives as Black women and how we sort of have to present sometimes to the exterior world. And and how we're perceived. So while both of these photographs were actually made by my grandfather, you see in one image they're in an intimate setting having a conversation, and then on the right-hand side, there's a figure, and you can kind of see it highlighted on the right-hand side. It's actually a face, and it's somebody who was looking through the window. And this was when my aunt was getting ready to go home from visiting, and they were at the train station, and you can see in the background that it says that this is the colored section of the train station. So this picture was always kind of like on the mantle when I was growing up, which was kind of interesting. And I was a little curious about it because, you know, I was just thinking about, well, what's that experience like to grow up in segregation? Both of my mom and aunt grew up in Jim Crow era, Dallas, Texas, and they kind of always joked about it a little bit, saying like, oh, this wasn't a photograph that we were necessarily, making to make a statement. It's just that was life at the time. And in the original photograph, that figure that I've sort of highlighted there, it's somebody who I always said appeared to be white, so we weren't really sure, but it was just like the idea that, oh, this person's in the wrong section, but it was sort of created to create a divide. So that was just something I was kind of interested in thinking about and playing with those different perspectives, as well as, the way that I use embroidery in my work is often just a mark that I'm making and sort of meditating and responding to history. So there's a lot of layering in my work. You'll see that it's screen print, monotype relief printing, and using different textiles and quilting those together. So, and this is a more recent work called Vantage Point. So again, thinking about what our interior experiences are like and sort of how we look out upon the world. And this is a piece that I began to quilt together, and there's a small piece in there that says my world was a black world. So again, thinking about our different perspectives and where we're sort of headed. So I think of my work as both abstract in a way, but also it's, there's some portraiture, but there's also elements of collage and abstraction. And this is a little bit more about my process. So you can see that I'm in the studio, printing on the left-hand side, and I typically work, in a lot of different places with the embroidery, which is something that I love. Being a mom as well, I need to kind of, we've all talked about having to get things done. So, I often take my embroidery and I'll be like sitting on the couch watching something, or you can see, this was actually at a residency where I started to work on this embroidery piece in the middle, but it was just outdoors and it's very portable, and it allows me to kind of have like a close, intimate relationship with the photographs, which is really important to me. And then as well, I've started to use more recovered fabrics, but a lot of the fabrics that I use are things that I've actually designed myself because there's a specific meaning for each one of them. So you'll see in this pinwheel quilt on the lower right-hand side, that's something that I printed myself, and then I'm layering on the applique and the embroidery on top of that as well. And then you can kind of get a sense of the scale as well. So this photograph on the upper right, that's me when I was about 4 years old, and that was almost at like a slightly larger than life-size scale. And again, we were asked to think about a legacy printmaker to work with for the portfolio. This is my portfolio piece called Note to Our Higher Selves. And I chose to focus on Belkis Ayoun because she worked a lot with cultural mythologies. Like she was focusing a lot of her work on a society that was sort of a secret society, but it was in her culture as a Cuban woman, and it was called Abacoa. And she wasn't a member particularly, but she was kind of studying them and thinking about our personal mythologies, how we kind of create our belief systems. So that's something that I was thinking about when I was creating this. And I think of the negative space here as sort of a possibilities, embracing the unknown. And that's an element that I'm sort of working with more in my work, is how do we sort of move from those things that were placed upon us and move forward. So this image that I used was one of my grandfather's images of my mother and my aunt that was very special to me, but just thinking about sisterhood as well is something that came to mind when I saw it, and thinking about how that's sort of its own culture in itself and its own sort of secret society. So I saw those parallels between that and a lot of Belkis's work. And of course, all of the ways that she used different materials to make her prints is something that really resonated with me in the way that I work with textiles and printmaking. And moving on from that, so this one is a print that I did in about a year ago for the Philadelphia Museum of Art. I was working with Tanika. We both did a presentation in conjunction with the Emma Amos retrospective there. And we were each asked to kind of look at her work and create something that was an homage to Emma Amos and her work. So of course, I relate to her a lot as a textile artist, and the way that she worked with print, the way that she worked with archival images. And this one, I mean, well, there's a few things I want to talk about, but the name pressure for me came from thinking of all the things that we had gone through during the pandemic, because this was at the end of 2021. You know, my son had been remote schooled and homeschooled, and just all the different, you know, the roles that I had to take on during this pandemic. And I thought about, which is a consistent theme, as mothers, as women, what do we have to do to kind of get through the day, and how do we present ourselves versus what's actually going on at home? You'll see that there's some vintage images or archival images of vintage pressure cookers in the image. You see it. So I was thinking about preparing food and sort of like this condensed energy that we really were feeling of being in, you know, cooped up at home and all those sorts of things. So that was one aspect of it. And then there's also, you know, the kind of term that people use to say like, oh, you're putting pressure on when you kind of like get dressed up and you're in your finery, and you know, it's like, that's pressure. So that's a flip side of it, a positive way of thinking about it. And the mask that I illustrated on the left-hand side, that came from the Sunday Society, and that was actually something that I found that's in the collection of the Met. And I was really inspired by it because I was reading that mask was meant to represent different beauty ideals in that particular culture, as well as, you know, it's supposed to sort of empower you and endow you with a certain sort of personal power and beauty. But that's a heavy crown to wear when we're talking about beauty ideals in the way that you have to present yourself to the outside world. So that's why it's sort of placed over her head as she's also focusing on her task. And another element that you'll see in a lot of my work is this sort of woven structure, this checkerboard pattern. That's also a reference to African textiles and the tradition of weaving. So this one it's screen print in quilter's cotton, so I appliqued that on as well. That was a reference to Emma Amos and the way that she used textiles in her prints. You know, not only the textiles that she made that are hung, but the ones that she typically appliqued different Ankara prints and things like that onto. So, yeah.
Oh, no, I got it. Thank you. So we still have a little time because we started a little bit late. But what I want to focus on this last slide for a second, because what I appreciate is that all four of you mentioned, you know, an older generation of printmakers that inspired you. You know, a few names that, you know, were mentioned, but what I like to think is that from this process, there probably have been other printmakers, other artists that you have been looking at, thinking about, and then now we have this generation on the stage. So, and some of the ones that aren't even here, to kind of also give our audience here more names, more artists to kind of add to their repertoire of knowledge, which I think is very important. I want to kind of ask a final question before we open it up to the audience. I think we have time for that. Great. you have this show up where your work is in Continuum. The portfolio has been bought by major institutions across the country. Your work is in the art market. It's being sold to private and public collectors. What does that mean for you right now? You know, how do you feel your work is being received in this particular moment? There was a comment in the last panel about the fact that, you know, a lot of institutions, a lot of collectors are focusing on artists of color. So people have feelings about that. I think it's important personally, but I'm also just thinking about, you know, this moment that we're in where there's a lot of attention, which is great, but also thinking about the longevity and the legacy of this. And your work is out there, it's making its own legacy, but how are you feeling about it? What I think are you receiving from it? Are you taking from it? Is there pressure? Do you feel like that's on you as artists and as creatives and as makers? So I'll leave that kind of very wide, open-ended question there, just to kind of take a minute to maybe reflect on and ask. Who wants to start that off? Go for it.
Oh, well, I'm enjoying things.
Yay!
Well, I think with for me, it's just to continue to do the things that I have been doing. I mean, I think somebody asked me the question yesterday, like, where have you been? I've never heard of you. I'm like, I've been in the studio working, you know. What I describe like underground. And so for me, it's just more about continuing to develop my practice, develop my process, and continue to make work that I believe in. So I'm very much into that. So earlier in my career, I used to get questions about, why are you still doing the figure? Or you should do abstraction, but I'm very set in what I want to do, and it's very purposeful and very specific. So for me, it's more about moving with intention. I'm really thinking about longevity. So thinking about what I want my career to look like in the next 5 years and the next 10 years. And so I guess longevity is like the name of the game for me. But I will say that I have had an increase in my career, just the visibility that's happened, but I still feel like there's a long way to go, because there, so many people here is like, I've never heard of you before. This is the first time I'm seeing your work. But we're out there, we're making works, and I think that's why collectives like this are important. So you can know who's doing what in the field, and not. And I admire all the artists who kind of have had these like platforms and center stages, but there are other people making work in all over the country. So I would, and just encourage you guys to continue to seek people out, ask, names of people, like who would you recommend as artists, or who are the artists looking at. So I think that's something like really important. But in terms of my practice, things are moving, and so I'm just really like trying to move with intention moving forward.
I just wanted to add to that. I think there's still so much more room to expand, because I think we talk about our foremothers. We talk about Emma Amos. We talk about Faith Ringgold, who's now in her 90s. Betty Starr's in her 90s. And it's kind of like, oh, we overlooked, we didn't know. And it's like, we're here, we're making work. So there's so much more room to really do the work to go and look for folks, I mean, having spaces like this and platforms like this is incredible. It's great. But I think, it's not always about us just going, hey, we're here. It's, I think there's room for people to do the research and kind of continue to think broadly,
For me, I don't think that I feel pressure. I was asked once what I wanted my legacy to be, and I thought that was a very important question, and it threw me off, because I was, giving a talk, and someone's like, so what do you want your legacy to be? And I think what I figured out was that I want to be for other artists what Elizabeth Catlett, what, Betty Starr, all of these artists, what they have been for me, a path for me, I want to be that for other artists. And so when I think about the work that I'm creating now and the things that are happening in my career, like LaToya said, I think about longevity. It's not the fame, it's not the fortune, it's the history. I want all of our work to be a part of that conversation. When you talk about the paths that are being forged in printmaking, and you talk about, the innovations that are happening in printmaking, I want our names to be synonymous with those conversations. So I think each of us take on a certain responsibility, and I think that's an individual thing for each artist. And my responsibility, I feel like, is to tell our story, to tell our narrative, and to be a part of that history when it comes to Black women and printmaking.
I think I would like to add on, like, I'm almost like speechless because like we haven't been able to like show our work together at the same time in the same place too often. I feel like just being in this space physically here, mentally over the phone, virtual, and then also like just being able to have the platform, just being here and being able to showcase our work at the Met and many other places. And I feel like you always go to art school, you're like the only one, like there's only like, you're the only one, and like the only one who might know that artist that someone might not know, and you're trying to explain yourself, you're trying to say this person you should know, and you're always feeling like, well, you should know this person, you don't know. And so I feel like the fact that we got a chance to be able to continue to make work individually and also come together as a voice and a vehicle to be heard, I think it's just like, I can't even describe how I feel at this time. And I feel like something that I also think my duty as an artist and as a mother, as an African-American printmaker, is just to continue to inspire. I feel like the youth and children are like where it is. And so if I have to go and I have to do demonstrations in front of young college students, I have to go to a library to print in person, I want to be that person to be able to use my passion for printmaking, and I'll be that vehicle to go out in public and say, this is printmaking. You know, I'm a printmaker. You know, I make this and I can print this. You know, and so I feel like I have children of my own. I used most of my life just trying to figure out how do I balance between having my children and having an art career, and I kept it separate. I did women for the longest time. Like, wait, I have children. I had to figure out I cannot keep balancing this act back and forth. I need to be able to figure out how I can continue to let my children see my work. Like, why is mommy gone? Because I'm up here trying to show how important that you are to me. And so I'm incorporating more children into my work. And I'm interested in like really thinking about the legacy being that is the children. So I feel like we can, you know, say, oh, you know, like the work is on the wall, but it has to go beyond the wall. Like, how do we get out in the community? How do we get outside the classroom? How do we bring them to us? How do we take ourselves to them? So I feel like that's like kind of my duty as an artist.
Thank you. And I'll also just say a final plug for those of you who are looking to purchase work. There's artists to support. So let's not forget that. That's a very important aspect of this conversation. But I'd love to open this up for questions. Do we have any? I mean, yay. Do we? Okay, great. Oh, okay, yeah, go for it.
Hello, ladies, queens. Each of you really brings an aspect of quilting to your work and women's work to your work and the expression of that through there. And I want to hear from you, as Delita spoke about the importance of the act of quilting alone, the piecing aspect of it, but then coming together to quilt as women and to create that legacy. I just see that as a thread throughout all of your work, and I'd like to hear from you about that inspiration specifically of that kind of quilting technique as well as practice.
Yeah, I wouldn't really consider like quilting per se, but because that's not necessarily my background. But I do understand of the aspect of taking different aspects of myself and putting them together. I think that happens like literally within the work. So a lot of the works that I have here, they combine elements of my carving from my printmaking practice. They combine my painting. They combine collage. So I'm really interested in taking all these different things and putting them together in a way that is kind of seamless. And I feel that also mirrors my life as well. So, you know, as you can see, we all have lots of different roles. We're artists, we're mothers, we're educators. So for me, it's the same act of like, how do I make all these things like work well with each other? So I often get the question like, how do you balance everything? So I don't think there is balance. I think there's harmony, right? So I want all these things to harmonize with each other. So at some points, like, you know, when you have a choir, right, sometimes the sopranos are stronger, and then the sopranos die down, and the alto is a little bit stronger. So I think about that in terms of all the different things that I do. So the piecing that together comes like in that aspect for me.
Of course, I've always talked about the history I have with my grandmother who lived with us, and she was a quilt maker. And we had several quilt makers in my family. And what I learned from her was that, she would put things together and she would also stitch things together. So she kept mason jars of buttons and perfume bottles and just objects. But all of these objects had a story. They had a history. And so every so often she would take these jars and these baskets and she would pour all these things out on the bed and she would go through them one by one and she would talk about where they came from, talk about their origins. So at an early age, I began to associate people, places, and things with objects and with patterns and with color. And so it was a natural flow for me to be able to bring that into my work, because I feel like what she was doing, she was passing this oral tradition on to me, and I had to find my voice, and my voice was the visual. So it was natural to bring the sewing into the work at that point.
Yeah, that's I think one thing that you said earlier, Delita, that really resonated with me was when you were talking about how you really felt free working in the form of collage and not having to, have certain right angles or things like that. And so I think my work is sort of heading in that direction as well, where I'm collaging different materials together, I'm layering, and it's my way of really responding to and sort of meditating on the imagery that I'm working with, because again, a lot of the photographs that I'm using are family photographs. And I think there's always a way for people to kind of find themselves in those photographs. That's what I've heard from folks, is that this reminds me of me and my sister, or I think it's a really beautiful thing. And I see, for me, the materiality is really important, just because it makes me feel connected to that history and that ancestry, but also it's a point of departure, and it's when you're able to layer those different things, you're sort of taking what you have, you're being resourceful and kind of coming up with something new. And maybe it's not entirely new, because there's always, it's a continuum, as we talked about with the portfolio, and our work is all a continuum of people that have come before us. But it's just, quilting and collage are also related, and that's kind of how I incorporate them.
I never thought about it like from the quilting aspect, but being that I had quilts from my grandmother growing up, and like being able to know like my mom can make something and put a lot of different other things in it, just basically using what you have and just relating to a lot of ladies up here, like LaToya mentioned, like there's so many aspects of who we are and who we are as artists. And so I think of like me being able to choose which medium I want to choose, what I want to work in, is like a layer of what's important to me. Like if I want to do a silk screen, if I want to do mokuhanga, if I want to do lithograph, I feel like I don't have to choose between what material, what medium I want to use. I think it just depends on what I'm trying to say, what's in my mind at the time, and what I'm going through, and I kind of determine what medium I'm going to use for that aspect. But I feel like there's just so many layers that really make up who we are, and I feel like I try to take my own experience and I put that into my work.
So we're already at like 2:15. I mean, I don't know. We can take one more question, because I know people want to also look at art. We have a question there, and
I'll save time, not to make a question, but to LaToya. I had to see it in person. Delita knows I gotta come and see it in person no matter how far I am. I've never seen anyone cut wood so delicately. You take wood cutting and you make it look like lithography or like it's silk. And I just wanted to say to the person who kept mentioning the classics and the foundation, she's created a foundation you've never seen before. No one's done it like her.
Hi, everyone. I was really interested and captivated by your work. I was here for LaToya and Stephanie's talk, and the depiction of your domestic life and your domestic work. So I was wondering, like, as a mom, as a Black woman, and as an artist, how do you feel bringing the beauty of your everyday life to people anywhere to view and to experience and relate to?
I think that's kind of been a new experience for me. So earlier in my career, I'm still a young mother, basically. My oldest son is only 8, but for me, I kept those things very separate. So for me, there was a lot of fear around me being a woman artist, and so I was just like scared. So I purposely did not talk about that aspect of myself in my work. But I feel like just a couple of years ago, for me, I want things to be authentic, and I was like, my experience is authentic, and I shouldn't have to like hide that aspect of myself as a woman and as a mother. And so I, started to bring them into the forefront. And so that piece, Carving Out Time, it is like a depiction of my day. So showing you like the intimate aspects of our life and putting that on display. And I think the power of that piece is not necessarily like, in the technique, which is important, or like how it's done, but I feel like so many people are able to connect and relate to it. And so when that work was on display at the BMA, I just had so many people that say, I experience this as a mom every day. I know exactly what you're feeling in this, piece at this time. Or like children were able to like connect with my sons in the piece. So it just touched on so many different levels. And I think people want to see that, want to see reflections of themselves. And so for me, it was just kind of a very natural thing to start doing. And I just kind of came to the point where like, this is my life. This is who I am. Like you either deal with it or you don't. So, but I don't feel like I should have to hide aspects of myself in order to be successful as an artist.
Yes, I love that. Sorry, I just want to. Oh no, I was just gonna add like. Ooh. Sorry. No, I think the common thread that we're talking about is just showing up as our full selves, and that's something that we're all kind of endeavoring to do. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, ladies, and thank you, audience, for coming this afternoon. Please go check out all the galleries. Like I said, LaToya's work is up, Delita's work is up in the booths, and thank you again. So have a wonderful afternoon.